Alright, what's poppin', people? We're back. And I don't know if I sound... Oh, I definitely sound a little bit different. So, fun fact, right? My other headset broke. So I'm using an older one, but this older one isn't really any different than the other. It's literally the same make and model. So I don't know if I sound different, but I've been told that I don't cut out as much while I speak over Discord, at least. So, I don't know, maybe the sensitivity's better on this one. Regardless, what's poppin', people? We got our first VR update in the post-Goodra world. This is, of course, also going to be before we get the next major tier shift coming in April. And so, hopefully this actually ends up being more or less accurate for a while. Obviously, too, this is the first VR shift after the, hail-related bans. Oh yeah, no, I see this thing spazzing out on my detection. But this is the first major VR update after the hail-related bans, as well as Bronzong leaving the tier. If you don't remember, the last VR update we did was, firstly, quite some time ago. It was like 1.5 months ago. And it was also still kind of being done with, like, Bronzong in mind. It was a rough one. I'll admit, it was a rough one. We probably shouldn't have done it when we did. We should have waited till like the end of January, but hey. It happens. Anyhow, let's get into this. I think there's some pretty interesting shifts as well in here to talk about, and potentially ones that I could comment on that I think will like, or I guess more Pokemon that I could comment on that I think should continue getting a little bit better. So the first one, of course, Rotom-O, once again, or maybe even just finally, becoming S rank, no longer continuously residing in S-. This is a Pokemon that, for some people, has always been debated as overrated, which I've never really understood. I think maybe the misconception with S-rank Pokemon is that they have to, like, dominate a game through, like, either sheer offensive or defensive presence, when I think we forget that a huge reason Pokemon become S-rank is not only because of their effectiveness, but also because of how easy it is to just put them on teams. And I'd be hard-pressed to find a Pokemon, other than, like, maybe Talonflame or, like, Silvally-Ground, and even that one has, you know, debate around it, that's as easy to put on teams as Rotom-O. This Pokemon, alongside Talonflame, frankly, is a core part of every balanced team, in my opinion, in NU right now. You do see a little bit of competition, right? I mean, we even see 2 other grass-type hazard removers rising up on this shift. Hell, even another grass-type right here, Decidueye. The main thing about Rotom-O, though, is that it's still the best Scarfer in the tier. I don't think too many people dispute that. But now, that's not exactly a hard thing to, you know, claim, because we don't have a lot of great Scarfers. There's, like, Passimian, but even that Pokemon's kind of falling off. I don't think people really use it a whole lot anymore. And then you're looking at, like, what, Indeedee Female? Which still hasn't really picked up. Still seeing mostly just some, like, fringe usage. And I'm just gonna look at, like, other Pokemon that are on the VR update list. There are other Scarfers, of course, you could think of, but, like, you look at maybe, Toxicroak? But usually you're seeing that Pokemon run setup-oriented sets. It's not a particularly important role to fill, and I think that's mostly because there are just so many other fast Pokemon in the tier. You talk about, like, Talonflame, like we had just mentioned, but also other options like, say, Aerodactyl, who we do see rising up on the VR, Salazzle, I mean, Inteleon, whether it's Specs or Scarf. But Rotom-O being such a good Scarfer, oh, Heliolisk too. But Rotom-O being such a good Scarfer is important because, one, Trick is really good at just denying a lot of its checks that same level of efficiency, right? Whether it's dropping a Scarf onto, like, an itemless Vileplume, or onto a Boots Dragalge, or onto, like, a Guzzlord. All of Rotom-O's checks get absolutely shafted if they have to take the Scarf. And that's why running, like, Defog on it, it works as a really good panic remover, because you aren't really married to keeping your Scarf as your item. And we still see a lot of other sets put in work too, right? Nasty Plot still has that potential to just own games, especially with one less check being present in the tier. Dragalge always being prone to just getting boosted versus and then volted on. Same kind of deal with Vileplume. Although Vileplume also, I'm seeing some people not as sold on it being, you know, that borderline S-rank threat. In particular, because, you know, Dragalge is even better with Goodra gone. There's just a lot that Rotom-O offers teams, you know, in addition it's really hard to block the Volt Switch of, because other than, like, Stunfisk Galar, which is by no means a metagame staple, all the ground types, or just even Voltimmunes in general, that you commonly see in NU, they're not taking Leaf Storm. And so, you gotta play really carefully around Rotom-O, because, you know, you fail the Volt Switch block, and you get Leaf Stormed. And that's, you know, obviously exacerbated when you're facing a non-Scarf set. Because then... Oh, this is so loud. Yo! Why are you loud? Now it's gonna be way too quiet, but that's honestly preferred. But, it's exacerbated further when you're facing those non-Scarf sets, where, you know, maybe Yachiberry in the ladder, because that's a great set, especially on... Yachiberry Rotom-O is one of the best, just, like, anti-Blastoise measures in the tier. And since Rotom-O's item is generally kind of trivial anyway, depending on the role you're going for, it's like, it's not even like you're running it just to counter Stoise, right? It's because you're running it because, like, I mean, what else do you really need? Lefties is good, but not overly required, especially if you go Pain Split. I find that you're not too reliant on getting that recovery. You know, Boots I think's always been kind of bad on Rotom-O. You just don't really need the... I mean, it's rocks. You protect yourself against rocks, you're not even weak to rocks. It's just really not that worthwhile of an item. And we talked about Scarf, of course, already. You still sometimes see items with Rotom-O, but with how uncommon the Poltergeist using Pokemon are, it's not really that required. It's a Pokemon that does so much, and I think for a while it was getting, like, forcefully underrated by some pretty poor arguments against it, so I'm glad to see it finally getting up to S. I would not ever drop this Pokemon out of S, frankly. Unless we get, like... I don't even... What ground type... What Volt Switch blocker do we need to make Rotom-O not able to just take over games by consistently keeping up momentum? I really don't know. I mean, Steelix? Yeah, that takes even more from Leaf Storm than Gunfisk. Okay, yeah. Great answer. Yeah, who is it? We need, like, a Sap Sipper Pokemon that also blocks Volt Switch, and I don't know if one of those exists. Maybe one does, and I'm just forgetting it. No, wait, I found it. It's Rindoberry Spadef Gastrodon with Mirror Code. Alright. Anyhow, next, Copperajah, another Pokemon returning to metagame staple status with a huge rise from AL to Whip Test minus. This should come as a surprise to very few people. Raja's back at that state where it doesn't really have defensive counterplay, consistent defensive counterplay especially. And yeah, it's only worse than how it was previously, because think about back when, you know, Flygon and Bronzong both first caught, like, really heavily on, you know, defensive Flygon in particular. And then you still had Talonflame around as, like, that kind of, hey, you gotta catch you with Stone Edge or else you risk Flame Body. And yeah, we don't have those Pokemon anymore. We still have Talon, but Raja's defensive counterplay has only continued to decrease as this metagame is developed. You can pretty much run coverage to to catch any possible switch into you, outside of, like, I don't know, Weezing? There's just, defensively answering Raja isn't happening. You are pretty much just forced to pivot around it well, and utilize your own offensive pressure to deny it those safe chances to break. Raja's really bulky, and so while you're not OHKOing it without super effective moves much of the time, the tier thankfully is at a spot where it's not too hard to fit a Pokemon that is both faster and threatens to OHKO it, right? So you talk about, like, Silvally-Ground, you talk about, like, maybe offensive every Aerodactyl's offensive, you talk about, like, Life Orb, Aerodactyl, you talk about, like, Machamp, Toxicroak. It's not, like, an impossible ask to fit these Pokemon on your team. And of course, Raja, unless it's getting brought in with a pivot, it's probably going to have to switch into a hit to get onto the field safely. And without, since its best breaking set is probably going to be that Assault Vest set, it is very reliant on Wish to continuously stay healthy so that it's not getting like threatened out by maybe some weaker moves that still threaten it, right? You think about like maybe Indity Female's Mystical Fire, like Spec Sylveon Mystical Fire. Moves that still threaten to KO it, but require a lot more help to do so. And a Silvally-Ground also going up Des Minus shouldn't come as a surprise really to anyone with how commonly seen this Pokemon has been. It's an alternative to Mudsdale, in that it's a really splashable ground type, where instead of being just a really good defensive presence, it's a really good offensive one. It's one of the best pivots in the tier just because of how fast it is, and how well U-turn and multi-attack kind of synergize with each other. You think about possible multi-switch-ins, most of them don't like U-turn, and you can even throw in Rock Slide there, right, because that catches your Talonflames, your Zatus, even like something like down here, you see Scyther. It's just a really good Pokemon at doing that whole roll compression thing where you get knockoff Absorber, you get Pivot, you get Volt Switch Blocker, you get Wall Breaker, you get potentially Sweeper, especially, you know, Flame Charge really helps there. It just does a lot for teams, and it's a Pokemon that everyone needs to keep on their team building list, even if it's just as a check. And we see Decidueye Rise. This one's like kind of whatever to me. I don't mind Decidueye rising up to A-. I think utility sets are a little bit better, at least right now, because Goodra not being around to just continuously take advantage of them is really cool. And with teams not really running Ghost Resists or immunities as commonly as they used to, wall breaking is also even more easy. I think Specs, like as an on-paper kind of take, I think Specs is probably really good right now. Bandit, Bandits, I think choice sets in general are probably pretty good, and Swords Dance kind of always has just existed as a potentially really potent sweeper. My issue with Decidueye has always just been that I end up wanting Rotom-O on the team. And while they don't fill really the same role, the fact that they're both grass types means I can't use them on the same team. And you also always have to be aware of like Poltergeist randomly proofed Pokemon like Vileplume and Weezing even. They're just kind of annoying. But I do really like how Long Reach Decidueye is, you know, a physical breaker that doesn't care about Talonflame's Flame Body or any helmets. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I do think Specs Decidueye is also kind of cool. Next up we got Rhydon with a little bit of a rise. Still not reaching like metagame staple status yet, but it compresses like... It does like Diancie plus Mudsdale in one slot, where it's a fire resist, also a flying resist, also a Volt Switch blocker, also keeps up a good amount of like power on a team. It's very much a Pokemon that you'd look to if there's just a lot of resistances that you want to add to a team. It's, as we said, it's not passive at all. You could even run Swords Dance to make yourself like, you know, even less passive. Kind of hard to fit on teams. If you want to check the like reasoning that Mary gave, something she talked about too was like when you can't do Mudsdale plus Vaporeon on a team, talking about how, you know, both of those combined do a lot of the same as Rhydon, and also is just like pretty good defensive core. It's a kind of a Pokemon that allots you a little bit more freedom in your other team slots, I would say. Snorlax rises up to B+. I've only voted it to B+. I could see it going up into the A ranks though next update. Expulso brought that up as like a point he kind of disagreed with, where he thinks, I mean, I think he's even said it's like A+ rank in his mind. I think the big reason, of course, is if you look at the fall off of Pokemon like Sirfetch'd and Toxicroak, there are fewer options around that just immediately threaten to bonk Lax, which is always kind of valuable. I do think its defensive utility is a little overstated at times. While it does provide you a lot of insurance against special attackers, I feel like when you consider what most of the breakers are in this tier being physical, that's not as valuable. Like, let's look at the VR right now, right? So let's look at the breakers. So Raja, physical, superpower, claps up Snorlax real easily. Silvally-Ground, physical. Snorlax ain't winning that 1v1. I am swords dancing and I am swiftly beating you down with multi. I mean, I guess, like, special Diancie if you're talking about, like, Meteor Beam or Specs, but that's still not super common. I still think it's an on-paper insane, like, amount of value you get out of a Pokemon, but still. Dragalge, fair point. Counterpoint. It flip turns versus you, or forces you to rest because of a Sludge Bomb poison, so yeah, have fun. Escavalier, mostly doing the specially defensive sets again. Although, of course, physical, more breaker-oriented sets can be problematic. Sylveon, I don't think you win that. I think Hyper Voice does 5 million to you if it specs. And then I think you do not outrest its damage. Guzzlord, you know, CB, okay. Goodbye, lefties. Starmie, I feel like I remember Analytic Hydro Pump doing 1 million. The problem is that requires Analytic, so, you know. Decidueye, physical can be annoying, but special you do, like, kind of bother. Explode, Boom Burst does 1 million. I have beaten down an AV Snorlax with Explode before. Yup. Golurk, yup, And then, now we're down to, like, niche territory, but again, when you look at the breakers, right? Heliolisk, okay, but Pivot, so you gotta be mindful of that. Sirfetch'd, good night. Tauros, I mean, it's physical, but I think that might not be the... No, CC's gonna rail you. Croak, good night. Tyrantrum, yep, good night. Machampion, oh, c'est la vie. The point is, I feel that breakers right now in Inyu are definitely more physically biased, and so you don't get as much value out of Lax as you may want. And of course, even out of the mons that it can switch into, a lot of them either gain momentum on it, or really heavily pressured to use rest. This has always been a problem for Snorlax too, where you're kind of forced to compromise between whether you want it to function more as a defensive presence in a game, or whether you really want to utilize that curse sweeping ability. And if you want to go with the latter, it's really hard to get as much mileage out of Lax defensively as you'd want. Curse Lax definitely has potential to just 6-0 teams on the spot. It's kind of like, it's like Scrafty in that regard. Think about even like Sun and Moon era Scrafty, where that Pokemon sometimes just wins because you don't have a Fairy type. Or like you don't have a Taunt Golbat, or you don't have some random Fairy coverage. Or you just don't have a Pokemon that like threatens to just immediately bonk it. And to say, no, you're not gonna just take 5 turns to set up it and beat me down because now I can't kill you. But at the same time, I just feel that because the defensive utility is always overstated because of how games actually do play out, I'm always a little bit... It's like I'm cautiously pessimistic about Lax, where I don't want to downplay how good Curse can be too much, but ignoring that, yeah, no, you have to make, like, active... It is a Pokemon that requires so many active decisions throughout the flow of a battle about whether setting up with Curse and sweeping is actually even that possible when you may need this Pokemon to do a lot defensively. It makes it hard for me to really jump on the Snorlax train, and also, I mean, with how I feel you really have to keep up speed on teams in this metagame, because there are quite a few slowish / mid-speed tier wall breakers that just run you a new one otherwise. Getting a team with Snorlax on it that feels like it quote-unquote makes sense can sometimes be hard. Now this could just be a, you know, certified skill issue on my end. Maybe I'm just not building with Lax properly. Maybe you can build teams with enough speed on them to not get dragged down by Snorlax's lack thereof. In particular, when you're running those curse sets. I don't know. It's a Pokemon that I'd still have to, like, debate with myself a little bit over whether I would move it up into A- or not. I think I probably would, on the merits of Curse sometimes just winning on preview. But I would not go as far as others who are saying, like, you know, A rank, A+ rank, because there are multiple people that believe that. Serena to B+. I feel like Serena's just shown a lot of versatility to make it, while Serena's still very much a rapid spinner and not a whole lot else, because she's got such a good move pool, I think people are more willing to, like, just experiment, right? So you got moves like Axel, Knock Off, High Jump Kick, Aromatherapy even, that all kind of allow you to do more with the moveset. I would say the only required moves are Power Whip and Rapid Spin. Maybe there are some non-spinner sets that work, but I feel like you probably don't bother with those too much. But then, like, U-Turn, Knock Off, Triple Axle, Aromatherapy, Synthesis, High Jump Kick, these all have merit to be used on her. And at a tier where, like, Hazard Control isn't that amazing, I feel like all our removers are ranked kind of low on the VR. So, like, let's look at them, right? So Rotom-O's way up at the top. Talonflame I don't count. That Pokemon's bad at removing. Ground Valley I don't count really either, because it just doesn't run those sets. Xatu isn't removal, it's a deterrent. Starmie doesn't really run spin sets, so you see the point I'm getting at right now. Same with Stoys and Decidueye. It's like, they can run those sets, but it's just so hard to justify. And as, you know, I'm sure all of you know by now, the only Blastoise set that I will ever recommend that is not Shell Smash is Block. Block, Rapid Spin, Scald Rest. You trap Vaporeon, you stall it out, and you also are a remover and at least a decent defensive presence. And I mean, then you're down to B+ finally, so okay, we see Serena. In B rank, we see Dhelmise. We kind of see Mantine. But with Mantine dropping on the VR, this shift, I'll talk about why I don't really love Defog Mantine once we get to it. And I mean, yeah, and then we're down, like, the C ranks, and who cares about these Pokemon that much, right? So this is pretty much always going to be a spinner, and I do think that holds some inherent value to it. It's of course also a Silvally-Ground check, and just a ground type check in general. Compared to Dhelmise, which I want to talk about more as well, obviously sucks that you take super effective from U-turn, and that's kind of why I value Dhelmise a lot right now too. I could see it going higher in the next update. Competition is of course like very much a thing for both of these Pokemon, because by using one of them you're saying you don't want to use Rotom-O. That can be a little hard to truly, like, sell yourself on at times. But I think having such a sturdy answer to a Pokemon like Silvally-Ground is really cool. And part of that just is the ghost typing, meaning you're not weak to U-turn. Yes, you still get pivoted on. Yes, you still take a lot of damage from +2. But not being chunked for, like, 80 is really nice. And also just, like, Whip Polter? Even without investing in attack at all on Dhelmise, this Pokemon does so much damage. I don't remember its base attack. It's like 130 though. And these are strong moves. And with Guzzlord, and even, again, to an extent, Vileplume, kind of falling to the wayside right now. Now, Plume is still an A+, by the way. So saying it's fallen to the wayside is definitely, like, speaking to how damn good that Pokemon is. Like, most teams are still quite bothered trying to switch into a Pokemon, but it's mostly filling a defensive role. It's also nice, of course, to have an emergency Blastoise check. Yes, you're having to play around potentially getting hacked by Dark Pulse. Yes, you're having to also play around potentially getting a Power Whip miss. But I mean, hey, you don't die to Ice Beam +2, so does it really matter that much? Also, wow, I speak up and I just see my mic setting in OBS. Or my mic, like, audio thing just absolutely saying, hey, speak quieter. But I won't. Anyhow, Duraludon goes to B. I couldn't tell you why. I think it's mostly just, with Goodra gone, it sort of fills the role of fast, special, dragon-type wall breaker. I think that's okay enough for a small rise. It also does do a little bit defensively when you look at least the physical side. So like Rock and Flying Resist isn't too bad. It is pretty good at exploiting Talon. And it still applies pressure to like Vaporeon and other bulky water types, similarly to Goodra. It just sort of sucks that steel types sit in your face all day long. Now Machamp to B. Now I'm going to give my take here. I know others agree. It's not reflected currently in the VR. I believe Machamp's better in Sirfetch'd. I voted both to be in B, partly because I still haven't seen a lot of Machamp. I am pretty content rising it also to B+ next update, though. But I think Machamp right now is just better. You don't care about the fighting resists like Sirfetch'd does, because you press Facade and they're dead. And you can say with Sirfetch'd, it's like, okay, well, it has coverage, and it can crit with Leak. I'll be honest, 50% crit chance with Leak somehow feels like it's a 5% crit chance when I play with Sirfetch'd and watch replays with Sirfetch'd in them. It's just not a good Pokemon. And Machamp's really nice too. Of course, for Guts, meaning you don't care about Talonflame. I think that's absolutely huge right now. And even considering like Vileplume's Effect Spore, I think that's also really huge. Again, it's one of those wall breakers that's kind of slow and does nothing for you defensively, so it is kind of hard, I think, to put on. You're not ever really going to just slap it on a team, you're going to build around it. I think Assault Vest Machamp maybe still has a little bit of merit to it as well, albeit less so with Goodra gone. And we see a Weezing Rise to be as well. Levitate Weezing is a Ground Valley counter. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. You also get to run Helmet, force it to take chip damage with U-turn anytime. You get to shut down a lot of the slower setup mons, like say Snorlax with Taunt. I think Weezing's just really good. And of course losing Goodra is good for it as well, because that's one less, special wall breaker that can sort of just brute force it. Entity Female up to B-. This is kind of like holdover from the Bronzong departure from the tier, where Entity Female is just a lot better now, because that's one less Pokemon to switch into an Expanding Force. And as you can see in the drops, both the Dark types of the tier, the common ones, are falling off. So that's fewer Pokemon, again, that can switch into your Expanding Force. Aerodactyl to B-. I actually voted it to B+, because I think Aero is incredible right now. But with teams using Ground Valley a lot more, Aerodactyl does have a lot more positive matchups, because, hey, Silvally-Ground, a lot easier to break through than, say, a Mudsdale. Again, we can harken back to Bronzong leaving as well. That's another sturdy Stone Edge resist that's gone. And we've also seen a surprising amount of versatility out of Aero. We've seen Life Orb sets be really good, but we've also seen some more utility-based ones, with like Stealth Rock and Toxic. They're more designed to make use of how Aerodactyl is a, pretty competent soft check at least, to Talonflame and Salazzle, while also being a really good way to lure Toxics onto, say, opposing Mudsdale, even onto something like, say, Vaporeon. And while, yeah, Vaporeon can heal Bell it away, that's giving you a free turn to do whatever. So, get your Vaporeon abuser out, and give it a free turn to do, something. And now we got some Pokemon getting put onto the VR. Eggialola up to B-. This is pretty known to everyone for why. On Arceus, in the NU Snake Draft Tour, used Harvest sets with Teleport and a Citrus Berry to pretty good success. And Eggialola is also just a pretty competent breaker. With Bronzong gone as well, you don't ever have to worry about some heat-proof shenanigans, so you get to beat down the current Steel types pretty consistently with Flamethrower. And while I'm not going to say Sylveon is like falling off in usage at all, in matchups where you're not against a Sylveon, you're also just a really, really strong wall breaker. And then, there's other things you could do as well. I remember Life Orb Synthesis, 3 attacks being really good. Specs is probably not bad. Ground Resist is always just kind of decent. Overall, just pretty cool mon. And he is quite simply above the haters. And we get Scyther being ranked as well. Pretty decent option on bulky offense teams for just making that slow kind of progress with knockoff and U-turn, giving you some speed, ground immunity, fighting resist. Decent amount of stuff for it. And now we get to the drops. There's even more of these, and I'm already like half an hour into this video. Diancie falls to A+ from S. Kind of probably was an overshoot by us in the wake of Bronzong leaving. I'm gonna just put it simply like that. I think we overshot its ranking. It got better with Goodra leaving. I think defensively it's just a little bit safer now because there are fewer Pokemon that just lure it in and kill it with coverage. And it still does some good stuff like resisting Exploud's Boom Burst. That is genuinely quite nice. It is a knockoff switch it as well. Offensive sets also, I would say, are quite solid. I've used stuff like Meteor Beam to good success. I've used Specs to good success. But it's not one of the top 4 Pokemon in the tier. I could say that. Now we see Guzzlord drop to A. I would have dropped it further, frankly. I think defensive sets are just not that good anymore. At least until we see, like, Ghost-type wall breakers just truly pop up and be everywhere again. I would say the water types as well. It's like, we don't really have water-type breakers. Outside of, like, Starmie, I guess? But, you know, you talk about, like, Inteleon, that Pokemon's certainly used. Kingdra would beat you anyway. Omastar probably would just beat you anyway. After a Shell Smash, I just imagine Ice Beam does too much. Blastoise, you only, like, kind of soft check with Dragon Tail. If you're Bandit, I'm pretty sure you get tabled by +2 Ice Beam. Maybe not from full, but not with much chip required. Wall breaking sets not as good as they once were, I would say. Not necessarily because there are like a whole bunch of Pokemon that just beat you. Because locking into Outrage is obviously never going to be a good thing. Because, okay, you are now revenge killed by whatever. Hope you got a KO. Hope you didn't Outrage into a Fairy type like Sylveon and give it a free chance to spam Specs Hyper Voice against you. It's just kind of awkward. Again, it's one of those Pokemon I feel that really does suffer from the metagame kind of wanting teams to be a little bit faster right now. And we see a Golurk dropped A- as well. Increased competition from Ground Valley, I would say, is the big reason. It is just the better offensive ground type. And we haven't really seen Golurk used much for a while now either, so it's kind of hard to say that it's one of the top, like, you know, 15 or so Pokemon. It's still incredibly potent and certainly benefits from dark types not being as common now. So it can't spam Poltergeist as reliably. But having a hard to switch into sort of slow wall breaker isn't like a niche that lacks competition. And oftentimes you can find a different wall breaker that's even faster. It does the same thing, you know, Tyrantrum would be the first one to come to mind. And then that still allows you to run Silvally-Ground as well, or a Mudstill, which frankly just do more on a game-to-game basis. A Drapion drop, this Pokemon hasn't been seen since dinosaurs roamed the earth. It's very weak without boosts. Ground Valley kind of just made this Pokemon very sad. And then you kind of get some awkward, like, moveset stuff. I feel like a lot of the time you have to pick between... Aqua Tail over Earthquake is easier to do now with Croak sort of being less common. There's a lot of Pokemon that give this mon trouble. Dark typing, as we'd stated with Guzzlord, just not that valuable anymore. And without boosts, you're not making progress. So have fun having to always use Swords Dance, lest you just want to be a weak knockoff bot. You're gonna get Sirfetch'd, a drop as well. Like I said earlier, I just think this mon kinda sucks. You have to really go out of your way to team build with it. Leak sets feel somehow inconsistent because, like we said, the high crit rate doesn't seem to actually mean that you're critting often. And then if you run Choice Band, I think you lose quite a bit of what this Pokemon does well, which is threaten stuff with First Impression, but then threaten to also just crit through your response to First Impression. Unless it's a Talonflame, then, well, you know. That just ain't happening no matter what. You are being forced out. If Tauros dropped to B+, I think partly is just because Tauros hasn't seen a lot of user success. It's still a good breaker, and being so fast is always going to be nice, because being able to just add some speed to a team is a good thing. With Dhelmise getting a little bit more common, you still have to run Throat Chop. Mudstail still being everywhere means you're probably not breaking. Same with like Vileplume and potentially physically defensive Vaporeons. It's just, I don't know. You just don't get mileage out of this Pokemon. You also have to always play around the threat of Talon pivoting on your coverage moves and it burning you. And then you're useless. So that kind of sucks. Croak fell. I don't know why. I'll be honest, that one I disagree with quite a bit. Vaporeon is still everywhere. Mostly because Wish is just so good on balance builds, same with Heal Bell. I do think you can build competent teams without Vaporeon pretty easily, and that's probably part of the sentiment for dropping Croak, where you say Vaporeon isn't really a necessity on builds, it's a luxury, and as a result, Croak isn't actually as good as A- rank would, like, tell you that it is. Braviary drops. I mean, the Mon just, again, it's like, it saw some success back, actually, in the Bronzong meta, so I'm surprised to see it drop, kind of. It saw success by, like, one person, I would say, is mostly why it dropped. It doesn't see the use to really mandate continuously ranking it super high. And although we do see a Diancie drop, that's not to say Diancie is bad by any means. It's still quite common and sees a lot of success. Aerodactyl getting better is also kind of bad for it, because you talk about another Pokemon that beats it down pretty consistently. And admittedly, it's not like it has a bad matchup against a lot of the VR or anything. I just think Braviary, again, forces you into those really slow teams that don't really flourish in this metagame like they did in the Bronzong meta. Mantine drops. It's not bad. I just think Mantine requires very specific building, because you can't really get away with it as a defogger too well. In my opinion, at least, because I feel Scald, Hurricane, Toxic are all so mandatory to not have this Pokemon get taken advantage of by half of the tier. If you drop Toxic and then literally everything in the tier switches into you and does not care, that's a lie. Of course, Scald is always threatening, but Toxic still limits your ability to threaten a lot of stuff like, say, Rotom-O, Heliolisk, Vileplume, Dragalge, not Dragalge, what? Wrong one. Wrong Pokemon. I was thinking of Goodra there, which isn't in the tier anymore. But special Guzzlord variants, we didn't really talk about those at all in the drop bit, but some people have been trying out, like, Draco on Guzz. Although you do check special Guzz very easily, so that's not really as big a deal. Of course, dropping Hurricane means something like a Toxicroak would really take advantage of very hard. Maybe people think that's a little bit more reasonable, given Croak kind of fallen off in the eyes of some. And maybe this also comes back to just people always wanting to use Vaporeon if they opt for a bulky water type. Vanillix drops. I think it's still a little overranked, but if you don't queue into a Scavalier, I do think there's some pretty decent potential to make good progress in matchups with Specs Blizzard. And then offensive ice types are also so uncommon in you that being an offensive ice type, I feel, kind of gives you some merit there. Just kind of sucks because you really want double removal with it, or you need consistent removal, I'd say, with it. And sometimes it can be hard to fit that onto your team. Maybe it's just really a matter of saying Xatu plus Defog Motum and it'd fill in the rest of the team. Deblade drops off. It's done nothing since being added to the tier. I think this thing's only real, like, call to fame is the fact that it counters the most common Copperajah sets. And I still think you might be able to get away with Earthquake on Raja and not be, like, totally messed up. Anyhow, Garbodor, kind of the same. It got ranked pretty highly for being the only Spiker available to us. But Spikes isn't really overly common, and when you do see it, it's usually Hyper Offense with a Frostlass. Or even Balance with a Frostlass. People just seem to view Lass as the better one. And even Weezing getting more use now further kind of hurts Garbodor, because, you know, direct competition for slot of a bulky poison type. Dragalge has also always existed, and similarly, direct competition for a slot. It just, again, the main thing I would say with Garb is just, yeah, how do you justify the slot over literally any of the Pokemon that would otherwise occupy its spot? Aurorus, again, this is a Hail-related drop. Meteor Beam sets actually are pretty decent from my experience, like offensive Stealth Rock, but it otherwise really hasn't picked up much usage in the wake of Slush Rush's ban. And we see Comfy drop, it just doesn't do anything consistently. Calm Mind sets are incredibly matchup dependent. Incredibly. Kingdra, you often would just rather have Blastoise. It takes one turn to set up, whereas with Kingdra, you're always having to get 2 turns. And then oftentimes you just end up queuing into a Sylveon, failing to KO it, and getting O-Code in return by Hyper Voice. Beartic. Goodbye, Slush Rush. Dredagon. Even with Xatu still being incredible, you just really don't see Dredagon get used. The other rockers oftentimes are better because they give you more defensively on your team. And I mean, Dredagon, I think, just hasn't been seen enough to really warrant too high a spot. Obviously, usage isn't a direct correlation to viability, but when really nobody's using the Pokemon, it becomes very hard to sell the masses on it being good. Glass continues falling off the face of the earth, and you, it probably isn't bad with Zong gone now, because Zong was the big reason that it was considered bad in the first place. Again, I would just say that slow Pokemon that requires many turns to really become a threat is a tough sell. Ninjask, I would actually just, yeah, say Scyther's better. Jask still has a place on Volturn, and being so fast is still always nice insurance to have against offense teams. But with Diancie being still really good, Copperajah being back to being really good, kind of just tough. Also, yeah, Talonflame, the other fast flying type. They do different things. They still kind of occupy that same slot, whereas Talon is just giving you more on a team and not forcing you to cater really hard to Ninjask's needs. Omastar drops. It's pretty much the same deal with Kingdra, where you'd probably just rather have Blastoise in that slot. Meteor Beam is still cool as a niche. If you can catch the Vaporeon, then you are absolutely beyond happy with life. But if you can't, then yikes. And then just some quick unranks that I don't want to talk about too much. Palisand was only originally really ranked because it beat Iron Press Bronzong. Ghost Valley, yeah, ghost types. But also because of the rising Silvally-Ground viability, and even a couple other valleys picking up at least enough merit to where it's kind of hard to rank this one if the others aren't ranked. Turtonator, it got ranked because it got a couple wins in like 2001 or something. I don't know, man. Doesn't do anything. It lures Diancie, that's about it. And in Uxie, this Pokemon is probably going to be unranked and re-ranked another 10 times this year, so just be prepared for that. Oh, my throat hurts now. That was a lot of talking. But that's the update, guys. And we can get just a quick little view of this as well. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope, you know, my explanations for why things happened for the shift make at least enough sense to you. As always, feel free to, you know, if you have a Smogon account, hey, comment in a thread changes that you think would actually be reflective of the NU metagame. We're always looking for, you know, people to post. Assuming it's not a bad post. Make sure that you put some good thought into your posts when you're making them. Kind of goes without saying, but sometimes I do feel people rush their posts out a little too much, just for the sake of, like, getting their hot take out there. And it's just kind of like, okay, but consider. No. That's all it from me. I'll catch y'all next time. Peace.